Where's the one in samba? This is a great question. And in this video, I'll be sharing with you 3 tips or guidelines to help you find the beginning of the rhythmic phrase in samba music. Let's first consider how we count samba. In other words, how many main beats or pulses there are in each measure or cycle of the music. I count samba in 4 beats like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And in a small group samba context, such as a samba band or a roda de samba, which is a circle of samba musicians, there will generally be one surdo bass drum, and it's either the surdo or the tantan that is generally responsible for supplying the pulse in the music. And this single surdo will play as its most basic pattern, in my opinion, just the following sequence. Mute, open, mute, open. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? Since the surdo is out of the frame, I'll show you that same pattern on this beautiful practice pad by Contemporanea. I'm going like this. Mute, open, mute, open. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now on the face of it, this is just a 2-beat pattern. We have a mute and then an open, and that sequence gets repeated. Okay, so why am I counting samba in 4 beats? Well, we have to consider what the other instruments are doing and even the vocal melody, but we'll get there in a minute. Okay, let's translate this to a bateria context. So in most samba school baterias in the Rio samba tradition, we have 3 types of surdo bass drums, first, second, and third. Let's leave aside the third surdo for the moment. The first and second surdos are responsible for supplying that pulse. So what we have on a single surdo in a small group samba situation, we translate onto 2 different surdos, okay? So the first surdo, or surdo de primeira, which tends to be the largest and deepest pitched of the 3 surdos, plays on beats 2 and 4 of the cycle like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. The second surdo, or surdo de segunda, which is typically medium-sized and medium-pitched, plays on beats 1 and 3, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? So together, if we take the first and second surdos and put them together, they supply the pulse, or the main beats of the samba, just like that single surdo does in a small group samba context. So the 2 surdos together, the pulse sounds something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Boom, 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 boom. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Second, first, second, first. Okay, so since on a single surdo we have open tones on the 2 and 4 and muted tones or muted notes on the 1 and 3. The 2 and 4 are the main accents in samba, and that's possibly why in most samba school baterias the first surdo that plays on 2 and 4 is the largest and deepest, because those are the main accents of the samba. Okay, now that we have an understanding of how to count samba, let's consider some other elements in the music that will help us determine where the beginning of the rhythmic phrase is. So first of all, in my opinion, there's an infinite number of possible rhythmic patterns or rhythms that can be played in samba. And they tend to, whatever the rhythms are, they tend to adhere to a particular rhythmic structure, which I've addressed and discussed in other videos. But here I'm just going to give you 3 tips for finding the one, okay? So let's go to tip number 1. Tip number 1 is that in many samba patterns, we have the following phrase on beat 4 in the music. So 1, 2, 3, 4, E, a 1, 2, 3, 4, E, a 1. So that's basically 3 notes. We're playing the first subdivision, the second subdivision, and the 4th subdivision of the beat. And we're leaving out the 3rd one, okay? So for example, in one of the most typical patterns for the 3rd surdo, which tends to be the highest, the smallest and highest pitched of the 3 surdos, surdo de terceira, this is one of the most common patterns. 1, 2, and 3, 4, E, a 1, 2, and 3, 4, E, a 1. Okay? We have the same situation in a family of caixa patterns in Rio samba schools that end the same way on beat 4. but with a buzz on the E on that second subdivision, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4 E, a 1, 2, 3, 4 E, a 1, or 4 E, a 1, depending on the sticking, okay? So the following samba schools in Rio, Mangueira, Portela, Império Serrano, and União da Ilha, have rhythmic patterns in which we have that phrase on the last beat. And in fact, in Samba New York, we have the same thing in our pattern that we use, okay? So whenever you hear those three notes played together, that is likely going to be the beat 4 in the cycle, okay? So we can think of music as involving tension and release. And we can think of tension as having more notes or more accents, and release as having fewer notes or fewer accents, all right? So for example, let's consider the Samba New York pattern. 1, 2, 3, 4 on the caixa. 1, 2, and 3, and 4 E, a 1, a 2, and 3, and 4 E, a 1, a 2, and 3, and 4 E, a 1, a 2, and 3, and 4 E, a 1. So you heard that we have the 4 E, a 1 on beat 4, and on all the other beats, we only have 2 accents. On beat 1, we have 1, a. On beats 2 and 3, we have 2 and 3 and. On beat 4, we have 3 accents. 4 E, a. Okay? So we can think of this tension as kind of congregating at the end of the phrase. We have tension that builds up on the last beat of the phrase that resolves and releases when we get to the one of the next phrase or the next cycle, okay? So that's very common, not only in samba, but in other styles of music. So be on the lookout for that in samba. Now, moving on to tip number 2. It's very common on the caixa and the repique and various other instruments or rhythms that are played in samba to have a very strong accent on the of 1. Okay, so the last subdivision of beat 1. And in my understanding, virtually all of the caixa patterns for the main samba schools in Rio de Janeiro have this feature where you're accenting the first beat and you're accenting the first note and you're accenting the last note of beat 1. So if we have 4 subdivisions in the beat, that becomes 1 E and a. That of beat 1 is very typical in samba. So for example, we have it in the Mocidade pattern for caixa. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, a 2, and 3, 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 Of course, we have it in the batida reta or the straight ahead beat, the most basic pattern for samba on the caixa, in my opinion. That's just this pattern repeated. We often have it on the repique where we're playing, sometimes we can play a slap on the of 1 and the of 3, 1 E and 2 E and we might play an open tone on the of 2 and the of 4. We often have it on the tan-tan, which is a type of bass drum played on the lap in a small group samba situation. Boop, bop, boom, boop, boop, bop, boom. So there's an accent on the of 1 and the of 3. So this is very common. So if we have an accent on the of 1 and the of 3, we won't necessarily know where the 1 is, right? Because that figure can be on the 1 or the 3. But in many different caixa patterns, it's on beat 1. 1 E and a. So let's consider now the Samba New York pattern. We have 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E, a 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E, a 1. Okay? So we have it there. So that's tip number 2. So where you have that accent on the of the beat will likely be 1 or beat 3. So that's a very useful tip. Let's move on to tip number 3, which is a little more complex. Now, some of you may be familiar with the rhythm known as teleco-teco, which I just call the samba timeline, based on the work of ethnomusicologist Gerhard Kubik. And Kubik claims that this pattern here, he refers to as a type of timeline or guide rhythm in the samba from Brazil, but it can be traced back to the Congo-Angola region of Africa. And check it out. This pattern, we also have the 4E in it, okay? So we have 1E. So on the face of it, it sounds like the pattern begins here. I love samba, yes, I love samba. I love samba, yes, I love samba. But it actually, in most samba songs, the beginning of the phrase is actually here. 1, I love samba, yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay, so on beat 1, there's actually nothing being played in this pattern. It's an empty pulse. Okay, so we can think of this rhythm teleco-teco as sometimes it's played on the tamborim. It's the basis for what the cavaquinho plays in samba. But sometimes this rhythm is not even being played in samba, but nonetheless, it's implicit in all the rhythms that are being played, okay? So it's a really critical rhythm to understand. And in this rhythm, if we hear this as the 1, 1, 2, 3, 4E, that 4E, that we have, that I showed you in that third surdo pattern, 1, 2, and 3, 4E, and also that I showed you on many different caixa patterns, 1, Samba New York, for example, 1, 2, and 3, and 4E, 1, okay? That we have that same phrase on beat 4 of the teleco-teco or samba timeline, okay? So when you hear the 4E, even in the teleco-teco rhythm, you know that will usually be beat 4, okay? Now, tip number 3 is actually involves the vocal melody, because we have to consider not only what some of the instruments are playing, but also what the vocals are doing if it's a song. And this is not a rule, but it's a very strong tendency that in many cycles of the samba, the vocal will actually emphasize the last subdivision of beat 4, the of 4. Okay, so let me give you an example. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Deixe de lado esse baixo astral, ergue a cabeça, enfrente o mal. Agindo assim, será vital para o seu coração. So that note right before the 1 tends to be accented. So let me show you how this fits in with the teleco-teco, because remember, all the different, and whatever rhythm we're playing needs to fit in with the teleco-teco. So, deixe de lado esse baixo astral, ergue a cabeça, enfrente o mal, que agindo assim será vital para o seu coração. É que em cada experiência se aprende uma lição. Eu já sofri por amar assim. Me dediquei, mas foi tudo em vão. Okay? So that's just one example. I can give you countless examples of sambas in which we have that last subdivision of beat 4 accented. So it's like the note that leads into the 1. Okay? Now, if we remember our pattern that goes 4E, it's the of 4 that's very often is being accented in the melody. Okay, so these are 3 tips or guidelines that will help you find where the 1 is in the music. The first one is the 4E, right? Very often we'll have that happening somewhere in the rhythm. We'll have very often an accent on the of 1, 1E and Sometimes we can have an accent on the 3 as well, so be careful. That phrase might be on the 1 or the 3. And we also have, in the vocal melody, very often we have an accent on the last subdivision of beat 4, okay? So I know this was a very theoretical kind of tutorial, but I hope that it gives you some tools that you can use, some guideposts, some pillars that you can latch onto when you're listening to samba, when you're playing samba, to help you find where the 1 is in the music. Let me know if you have any questions or comments, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.